What he didn't know was that my former business partner had helped me establish offshore accounts years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. When my son demanded I empty my retirement fund for his failing business venture, I finally had to make a choice: remain the doormat mother or reveal the secret fortune I'd been protecting all along. The look on his face when I showed him my real bank statements was worth every penny I'd hidden away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 38 years, Rebecca Morgan woke up at 5:15 every morning to build a life for her family, a life her son James would later feel entitled to control. After Thomas passed away from a heart attack when James was just 12, I became both mother and father to him, Rebecca explains, her keen eyes reflecting decades of both joy and struggle. Those early years were tough, balancing grief, single, parenthood, and a demanding career. But we managed. I worked as an investment strategist for Westlake Financial, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed me to put James through college without debt. That was always my priority, giving him the opportunities I never had. The walls of Rebecca's modest home tell the story through family photos: James's high school graduation, college move-in day, moments that marked milestones in both their lives. I still remember dropping him off at Harrington University. Rebecca continues. Tuition was $45,000 a year, not including housing and expenses. People asked if I was taking out parent loans. I always said no. I didn't want debt hanging over either of us when he graduated, so I took on consulting projects on weekends, invested carefully, and lived below my means. Rebecca's lifestyle reflected these choices: simple meals prepared at home, an older model car she maintained herself, weekends spent on home repairs rather than vacations. James graduated with a business degree and an attitude to match, Rebecca says with a slight frown. He'd call sometimes to tell me about the parties, the connections he was making, the lifestyle he was enjoying. I was proud, of course. Isn't that what every parent wants? To see their child succeed? Have things easier than they did? 2 years ago, Rebecca finally retired at 60. Her 401k had accumulated just over $850,000. Not a fortune, but enough for a modest retirement if managed carefully. She had paid off her mortgage, carried no debt, and her needs were simple. After 4 decades of 60-hour work weeks, she believed she'd earned some peace. What should have been the beginning of Rebecca's well-earned retirement took an unexpected turn when James invited her to dinner at Castellano's, the kind of restaurant where entrees cost more than Rebecca's weekly grocery budget. "Mom, I'm glad we're doing this," James said, his expensive watch glinting under the restaurant's soft lighting as he ordered wine without glancing at the price. "You need to get out more now that you're retired. Enjoy the finer things." "It's nice to see you too, son," Rebecca replied. "How's the new position treating you?" James smiled confidently. "That's actually why I wanted to see you. I've been offered an incredible opportunity. The CEO is restructuring, and I have a chance to buy in as a partner." "That sounds impressive," Rebecca nodded. "They must really value your contributions." "It's more than that," James leaned forward, excitement evident in his voice. "It's validation of everything I've been working toward. All the networking, the late nights, the strategy sessions. This puts me on the fast track to the top." "I'm proud of you, James. Your father would be too." James's expression shifted, becoming more focused. "There's just one hurdle. I need capital to secure my position. The buy-in is significant." "How significant are we talking about?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "Just $200,000, James replied casually, as if discussing pocket change. "I know it sounds like a lot, but the returns will be incredible. We're projecting to double our valuation within 18 months, triple it in 3 years." $200,000, Rebecca recalls, her voice heavy with the weight of the Request. That was nearly a quarter of my entire retirement fund. Money I'd spent 4 decades accumulating, carefully investing, protecting through market crashes and recessions. Money that represented thousands of early mornings, late nights, missed weekends and postponed dreams. James, that's a significant portion of my retirement savings. I'm not sure I can— Mom, James interrupted. This isn't just for me. Think of it as an investment for both of us. When the company goes public, you'll get back every penny plus so much more. This could fund a much better retirement for you. Even if the projections are accurate, that's years away, Rebecca pointed out. I need my savings now, for my daily expenses. You're living in the same house you've had for 30 years, James dismissed with a wave of his hand. Your expenses are minimal, and you always said you wanted to help me succeed. Rebecca walks along the beach near her home, the place where she finds clarity when life becomes complicated. I'd always wanted to give James every advantage in life, but something about this request felt different. It wasn't just the amount, it was the expectation in his voice. As if my savings were just another resource for his ambitions. Memories flood back. The overtime shifts, the vacations never taken, the used cars she drove while putting James through private school, and then an Ivy League college, the retirement trips she'd planned but kept delaying because James needed money for a car, for an apartment deposit, for business suits for interviews. I need some time to think about this, James, Rebecca said finally. It's a big decision. James's smile faded, impatience showing. What's there to think about? This opportunity won't wait, Mom. Other investors are lined up. I came to you first because I thought you'd want to be part of my success. And I appreciate that, but we're talking about a quarter of my retirement savings. I can't make that decision over dinner. I didn't think you'd be so hesitant, James replied coolly. It's not like you have other plans for the money. What else are you saving it for? For my retirement, James, Rebecca answered, genuinely confused. For the next potentially 20-30 years of my life? Driving home alone that night, streetlights reflecting on her troubled face, Rebecca felt the weight of the decision ahead. I agreed to consider it. What James didn't know was that I already had serious doubts about his startup. A former colleague, still in the industry, had warned me that their business model was flawed and their customer acquisition costs were unsustainable. But James wouldn't have listened to that. He never did when it came to criticism. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how different James was from the boy she raised. When had he started seeing his mother as a means to an end rather than his parent? When had money become more important than their relationship? Rebecca opens a safe hidden in her home office, taking out a business card with international contact information. There was something else James didn't know, something I never thought I'd need to reveal. 2 weeks later, James arrived at Rebecca's home unannounced, with an ultimatum that would push their relationship to the breaking point and force Rebecca to make a decision she'd been avoiding for years. 2 weeks of research had confirmed Rebecca's suspicions about James's company. The quarterly reports showed declining revenue despite the CEO's optimistic projections. Customer acquisition costs were spiraling while retention rates plummeted. It wasn't just a risky investment. It was a sinking ship. Rebecca had prepared a folder with her findings, hoping for a rational discussion with her son. But when James arrived that Sunday morning, his expression made it clear that reason wasn't on the agenda. "Have you made a decision yet?" James asked without even sitting down, his tone clipped and businesslike. No greeting, no asking how Rebecca had been. Just straight to the money. "I've been looking into the company," Rebecca replied carefully, motioning to the dining room table where she'd laid out her research. "I found some concerning trends that we should discuss before." "You've been spying on my company?" James's face flushed with anger. "Who gave you the right to go digging through our internal metrics?" "They're publicly available quarterly reports, James. Nothing confidential. And as a potential investor, I have every right to examine potential. Investor? James scoffed. You're my mother. This isn't about due diligence. It's about supporting your son. Rebecca took a deep breath. Supporting you doesn't mean making financially unsound decisions. The company's customer acquisition costs have doubled in the last year, while revenue per customer is down 30%. These aren't good indicators. James dismissed the concern with a wave. Those are temporary setbacks. We're pivoting to a new strategy next quarter. All I'm saying is that $200,000 is too much to risk on. Too much? James interrupted again, his voice rising. Do you have any idea what my stake could be worth in 5 years? Millions. And you're worried about a measly $200,000? It's not measly to me, Rebecca said quietly. It's a quarter of everything I've saved for retirement. James stalked around the room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. I don't understand you, Mom. You've always been so risk-averse, so small-thinking. This is why you ended up as a mid-level strategist instead of making something of yourself. The word stung more than Rebecca expected. All those years of sacrifice, of putting James's needs before her own, reduced to a failure to make something of herself. I made something of myself, Rebecca replied, her voice steady, despite the hurt. I raised you. I put you through college. I gave you opportunities I never had. And now I'm trying to do something with those opportunities and you're standing in my way. James slammed his hand on the table, sending several of the financial reports fluttering to the floor. I'm not standing in your way. I'm just not willing to empty my retirement account for a company that's showing clear signs of, just admit it. James cut in coldly. You don't believe in me. You never have. That's not true, Rebecca protested. I've always believed in you. But this isn't about you. It's about the business model, the market conditions, Save it, James snapped. If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will. Maybe Uncle David will see the opportunity you're too blind to recognize. Your uncle doesn't have this kind of money to invest, James. You know that. Then I'll find investors who do. People who understand vision and aren't stuck in their small, safe little worlds. Rebecca felt a deep weariness settle over her. This wasn't a discussion. It was a demand. And no amount of evidence or reason would change James's mind. I'm sorry, but my answer is no. I can't invest the $200,000. James's expression hardened. No? Just like that? I'll help you in other ways. I could spare maybe $20,000, or I could connect you with some of my old colleagues who might be interested in $20,000? James laughed bitterly. That's insulting. What am I supposed to do with that? Buy a few office chairs? It's what I can offer without jeopardizing my future. James's eyes narrowed. Your future? Mom, you're 62. Let's be realistic about how much future you're saving for. The cruel calculation in her son's voice sent a chill through Rebecca. When? Had James started measuring her worth in remaining years? I need to think about the possibility of long-term care, medical expenses. So that's it? James interrupted again. After everything I've done to make you proud, you're just going to let this opportunity slip away? The biggest chance of my career? I believe there will be other opportunities, Rebecca said gently. Better ones, with more solid foundations. James's face twisted with disgust. God, you sound just like those dinosaurs at the bank. No vision, no courage. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. You know what? Keep your money. Sit here in this sad little house counting your pennies. See if I care. Before Rebecca could respond, James turned back, his expression suddenly calculating. Just remember, when you're old and need someone to take care of you, I'll be the one making decisions about your care. And I'll remember this moment. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Are you saying you wouldn't help me if I needed care? Rebecca asked quietly. James shrugged. I'm saying choices have consequences. You're choosing your retirement account over my success. Remember that when you're deciding who gets your power of attorney. With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him with such force that Rebecca's framed family photos rattled on the wall. One fell, the glass cracking as it hit the floor. A photo of James's college graduation day, both of them smiling proudly. Rebecca sat in stunned silence, the broken frame a too perfect metaphor for what had just happened to their relationship. Her phone buzzed with a text message from James. Last chance. Either transfer the money by Friday or don't bother calling yourself my mother anymore. Rebecca stared at the words, each one cutting deeper than she thought possible. Not just the demand for money, but the conditional nature of their relationship. Pay up or lose your son, as if decades of love and sacrifice could be reduced to a transaction. The next day, Rebecca received a group email from James to the extended family. Reading it, her hands trembled with disbelief. I wanted to let everyone know that Mom has refused to help with my business opportunity, despite having the means to do so. She's chosen to hoard her retirement savings rather than invest in her only son's future. I'm deeply hurt, but will persevere regardless. I just wanted you all to understand why there might be tension between us at upcoming family gatherings. The responses flooded in quickly, most expressing shock that Rebecca would be so selfish. Cousin Meredith wrote, I can't believe Aunt Rebecca wouldn't help her own son. Aunt Patricia added, family should come first, especially at her age. Only. Rebecca's brother David called directly, his voice hesitant. Becky, is everything okay? James's email seemed one-sided. It was, Rebecca confirmed wearily. He wanted $200,000 for a company that's showing serious red flags. I offered what I could without risking my future, but it wasn't enough for him. $200,000? David whistled. That's a huge ask. Don't let the family pressure get to you. They don't understand what it's like to be nearing retirement. That evening, Rebecca sat alone in her garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Thomas had planted these rose bushes 20 years ago. He would have known what to do in this situation. He always had better instincts about James's manipulative tendencies. Her phone rang again, her sister-in-law this time. Rebecca, you need to reconsider. James says this opportunity is time-sensitive. Surely you can spare something from your savings? What are you saving it all for anyway? The pressure mounted over the next 3 days. More calls, more emails, more family members taking sides in a conflict they didn't fully understand. James's Friday deadline loomed closer. The implied ultimatum weighed heavily on Rebecca's mind. Was her retirement security worth losing her son? Was her relationship with James already lost if it hinged on financial transactions? On Thursday night, Rebecca removed the business card from her safe and placed a call to a number she hadn't dialed in over 15 years. Vivian, it's Rebecca Morgan. Yes, it's been a long time. Listen, I need to access those accounts we set up. Yes, all of them. It's time. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Rebecca had barely slept, her mind churning with memories and what-ifs. As she prepared her morning coffee, the doorbell rang. James, precisely at 9 a.m., as punctual for money as he was tardy for family gatherings. I assume you've made your decision, James said coldly, brushing past Rebecca, into the living room without waiting for an invitation. He wore a tailored navy suit as if this were just another business meeting on his packed calendar. I have, Rebecca replied, closing the door slowly. Would you like some coffee first? I don't have time for small talk. The CEO needs an answer. By noon. Are you transferring the money or not? Rebecca studied her son's face, the face she'd watched grow from a round-cheeked toddler to the angular, determined man who stood before her now. Somewhere along the way, something essential had been lost. A connection that money couldn't rebuild. No, Rebecca said finally. I'm not transferring $200,000 from my retirement account. James's jaw tightened. Then we have nothing more to discuss. He turned toward the door. I meant what I said in my text. Don't expect. I didn't say I couldn't help you, Rebecca interrupted quietly. I said I wouldn't take it from my retirement account. James paused, confusion flickering across his face. What are you talking about? Sit down, James. There's something you don't know about me. Something no one in the family knows. Curiosity overcame James's anger, and he lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa. What is it? Rebecca retrieved a leather portfolio from her desk drawer and placed it on the coffee table between them. Before you were born, when I first started at Westlake Financial, I worked closely with a brilliant investor named Vivian Keating. The Vivian Keating? The hedge fund woman? James's eyes widened. You never mentioned knowing her. There's a lot I never mentioned, Rebecca said, opening the portfolio. Vivian and I developed some innovative investment strategies that made the firm millions. As a thank you, she offered to help me set up my own investment structure, something that would provide security regardless of what happened at the firm. What kind of structure? A series of offshore accounts and investments. Perfectly legal, Rebecca added, noting James's expression. Just private. The kind of arrangement usually reserved for the ultra-wealthy. James leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. How private? How much are we talking about? Rebecca removed several documents from the portfolio and spread them across the table. Account statements from the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Switzerland. Property deeds for apartments in London and Barcelona. Stock certificates for blue-chip companies dating back decades. I started with a modest amount, about $50,000 that I'd inherited from my grandmother. Vivian helped me place it strategically, reinvesting the gains, diversifying across markets and currencies. Over 40 years, it grew. James grabbed one of the statements, his eyes scanning the balance. Then another. And another. His face paled. This can't be real. This statement alone shows $2.8 million, Rebecca finished for him. And that's just the Singapore account. But how? You drove a 10-year-old Honda. We took budget vacations to Florida. You bought clothes at department stores during sales. If you had this kind of money, why did we live like a normal middle-class family? Rebecca suggested mildly. Because that's what we were, James. The offshore accounts were my insurance policy, not my lifestyle fund. I never wanted to raise a child who felt entitled to wealth. James continued flipping through the statements, the total picture slowly coming into focus. These accounts combined are worth over $8.5 million, he whispered, almost to himself. And you've had this all along? While I was taking out student loans for my MBA? While I was living in that tiny apartment during my first job? The student loans were your choice, Rebecca reminded him gently. I offered to pay for your MBA, but you said, and I quote, I need to stand on my own 2 feet. The apartment was also your choice. You said you wanted to live in the city center, close to the nightlife. But you could have... James stopped. Himself, seeming to realize the absurdity of complaining about his mother not giving him enough, while holding evidence of millions in hidden assets. I could have spoiled you, Rebecca acknowledged. Given you everything without you having to work for it. But what kind of mother would that have made me? What kind of man would you have become? James set down the documents, his expression unreadable. So, all this time, when I thought you were just a mid-level corporate drone living paycheck to paycheck? I was building something significant, Rebecca finished. Something that could provide security for generations of our family. If managed, wisely. A kaleidoscope of emotions crossed James's face. Shock, confusion, the beginnings of calculation, and something else harder to identify. Perhaps respect, perhaps just reassessment. Why are you showing me this now? He asked finally. Rebecca sat back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. Because you gave me an ultimatum. Either fund your business venture or lose my place as your mother. It forced me to consider what kind of relationship we really have. And? And I realized I've been enabling a pattern that needs to stop. For years, I've given you what you wanted. Not everything, but enough that you never faced real consequences. I paid for the car you crashed in college. I covered the security deposit you lost on your first apartment. I helped with the down payment on your condo. James shifted uncomfortably. That's what parents do. To a point, Rebecca agreed. But eventually, children need to become fully independent adults. I'm showing you these accounts because I want you to understand something important. I have the means to give you the $200,000 you're asking for. What I don't have is the confidence that it would truly help you grow. So this is what? A power play? Showing me what I could have access to if I jump through your hoops? James's earlier shock was hardening back into defensiveness. No, Rebecca said firmly. This is me being honest with you, perhaps for the first time. These accounts exist, they're substantial, and yes, one day they'll be yours to manage. But that day isn't today, and it won't be hastened by threats or ultimatums. James stood abruptly pacing the small living room. I don't understand. If you have all this money, why not help me now? $200,000 is nothing compared to what you're showing me here. Because throwing money at problems rarely solves them, Rebecca said. I've reviewed your company's financials. The issues go deeper than simple undercapitalization. The business model itself is flawed. What you need isn't my money. It's a complete strategic overhaul. So you're still saying no? James's voice hardened again. I'm saying I won't fund a failing strategy. But, Rebecca added, holding up a hand to forestall James's protest, I am willing to help you develop a better one. I don't need your business advice, James scoffed. I have an MBA from Wharton. I've worked in venture-backed startups for a decade. And yet your company is hemorrhaging cash with a customer acquisition cost 3 times higher than industry standard. Knowledge isn't the same as wisdom, James. Sometimes experience matters. James fell silent, glancing down at the wealth of documents still spread across the table. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. I just need capital to secure my partnership position, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. No, Rebecca said gently. What you need is to step back and evaluate whether this partnership is worth securing at all. Sometimes the best opportunities are the ones we walk away from. James ran a hand through his hair, his carefully constructed facade cracking slightly. If I don't buy in by Monday, I lose my chance. Daniels already has another buyer lined up. And if that's the case, then Daniels is creating artificial scarcity to force a hasty decision. That's not how legitimate business opportunities work. You don't understand startup culture, James insisted, but the fire had gone out of his argument. Perhaps not, Rebecca conceded. But I do understand human nature, and anyone rushing you to invest without allowing for proper due diligence is someone to be wary of. James sank back onto the sofa, the fight visibly draining from him. So, what am I supposed to do? Just let this opportunity pass? Watch someone else take my place? I'm suggesting you consider that it might not be the opportunity you think it is. Rebecca gathered the financial documents and returned them to the portfolio. And I'm offering you something potentially more valuable than a one-time cash infusion. What's that? Partnership of a different kind. My experience, my network, and yes, eventually, access to the resources I've built. But as a true partner, not as an ATM and a son demanding withdrawals. James was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I told everyone you were abandoning me, he said finally, his voice small. That email to the family. I know. I didn't expect. James gestured vaguely at the portfolio. Any of this. Few people do, Rebecca said. We all construct narratives about the people in our lives. Sometimes we need those narratives challenged to see the full picture. Outside, rain had begun to fall, a gentle patter against the windows that filled the silence between them. Finally, James looked up, his expression more vulnerable than Rebecca had seen in years. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," Rebecca replied. "This is a lot to process. Take some time. Think about what kind of future you really want to build, and who you want to be in that future." James nodded slowly, then stood to leave. At the door, he paused, turning back with an awkward, uncertain gesture. "I'm sorry about what I said. About not being your son." "Anymore, I didn't mean it." "I know," Rebecca said again, and this time, she believed it was true. The weekend passed in unsettling silence. No calls from James, no texts. Rebecca found herself checking her phone more often than she cared to admit, wondering if the revelation of her hidden wealth had irreparably damaged what was left of their relationship. Had the shock of discovering his mother's secret life been too much? Or was James simply regrouping, recalculating his approach now that the financial landscape had shifted? On Sunday evening, as Rebecca was preparing a simple dinner for herself, her doorbell rang. Standing on her porch was James, noticeably different from the polished, aggressive man who had demanded money just 2 days earlier. His hair was slightly disheveled, his expression uncertain, his typical designer outfit replaced by casual jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, more like the son Rebecca remembered. "Can I come in?" James asked, his voice lacking its usual confident edge. Rebecca stepped aside. "Of course." James entered hesitantly, as if suddenly unsure of his welcome in the home where he'd grown up. "I've been thinking about everything you showed me, everything you said." "I figured you might need some time," Rebecca replied, leading him to the kitchen. "I was just making dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta primavera. Would you like some?" James nodded, the familiar smell of his mother's cooking seeming to ease some of the tension between them. He sat at the small kitchen table, watching as Rebecca added a second place setting. "I looked up Vivian Keating," James said after a moment. "Found an old Wall Street Journal article about her. It mentioned her innovative approach to private wealth management in the 90s, but nothing about you." "That's not surprising," Rebecca replied, stirring the sauce. "Our arrangement was private. That was the whole point." "Why did you keep it secret all these years? Even from me?" Rebecca considered the question as she drained the pasta. "Initially, it was just prudent financial management. Vivian taught me that true wealth stays quiet, both for privacy and tax efficiency. But as time went on, especially after your father died, I realized something else." "What?" "That money changes how people see you, how they treat you. I didn't want that for us. People cozying up to you because your mother had money, treating you differently. I wanted you to form genuine relationships, to be valued for yourself, not for your mother's bank accounts." James absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. "But that's exactly what happened at my company. Daniels only offered me the partnership because he thinks I have money, or access to it through you." "And how does that make you feel?" Rebecca asked, setting a plate of steaming pasta in front of her son. James stared at the food, then looked up with an expression of dawning clarity. "Used, like I'm just a means to an end for him." He paused. "Is that how you felt when I asked for the money?" The question hung in the air between them, more honest than anything James had asked in years. Rebecca sat down across from her son, choosing her words carefully. "Yes," she admitted finally. "It felt like our relationship had been reduced to what I could provide financially. Like all those years of being your mother counted for nothing if I couldn't write a check." James winced, the truth visibly landing. "I didn't see it that way. I don't know what I thought. That you'd be proud I was becoming a partner. That you'd want to be part of it." "I am proud of you, James, I always have been. But a business partnership should stand on its own merits, not on family obligation." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the conversation pausing as they both processed what had been said. Finally, James set down his fork. "I went back to the office yesterday," he said. "Looked more closely at the numbers the way you suggested. And you were right. We're spending almost $300 to acquire customers who only generate about $120 in lifetime value. The math doesn't work." James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "How did I miss that? I have an MBA. I'm supposed to know better." "Sometimes we see what we want to see," Rebecca said gently, "especially when there's pressure involved. When did Daniels first approach you about the partnership?" "Right after I closed the West Coast deal last month. Our biggest client yet." "So he waited until you'd proven your value, then dangled ownership in front of you, but only if you brought in substantial capital." James nodded slowly. "When you put it like that, it sounds manipulative." "It is manipulative," Rebecca confirmed. "He's leveraging your ambition against your judgment." James pushed his plate away, appetite seemingly gone. "So what do I do now? I already told everyone I was buying in. The whole company expects me to become a partner next week." "You have options," Rebecca said. "More than you realize." "Like what?" "Walk away, after 3 years building my position there?" "That's one option," Rebecca acknowledged, "but not the only one. You could propose an earn-in arrangement instead of a buy-in. Negotiate for equity based on performance metrics rather than capital contribution. Or what?" Rebecca set down her own fork, meeting her son's eyes directly. "Or you could start fresh. Build something that's truly yours, not just a piece of someone else's vision." "Start my own company?" James looked incredulous. "That would take even more capital than the partnership buy-in." "Not necessarily. The right business model, properly structured, can be bootstrapped. Scale comes from strategy, not just initial investment." Rebecca paused. "And if the concept is sound, you might find investors willing to back you. Investors who care about more than just your ability to write a check." James fell silent, considering this new perspective. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the last rays of Sunday evening sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes in the air between them. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," James admitted finally. "Starting from scratch. Building something entirely new." "Few people are ever truly ready for the biggest challenges," Rebecca replied. "But that doesn't mean they're not capable." James looked around the modest kitchen, his gaze lingering on the refrigerator still decorated with his childhood artwork, preserved under magnets for over 20 years. "Can I ask you something else? About the accounts?" "Of course. If you've had millions all along, why do you still live here? You could have a penthouse, a beach house, anything you wanted." Rebecca smiled. "Who says I don't have what I want? This house has everything I need. It's where you grew up, where your father and I built our life together. Why would I trade that for a sterile penthouse?" "But you never spend any of it," James pressed. "What's the point of having money if you don't use it?" "I do use it, just not in the ways you might expect. Last year, I funded a scholarship at Harrington in your father's name. The year before that, I helped David's daughter start her bakery. I've been paying for your cousin Michael's medical treatment since his insurance denied coverage." James's eyes widened in surprise. "I had no idea." "That was intentional," Rebecca said. "True generosity doesn't need an audience." The revelation seemed to humble James in a way the offshore accounts themselves hadn't. "All this time, I thought I was the successful one in the family. That I had outgrown," he gestured vaguely at the modest surroundings. "Material success is just one measure of a life well lived," Rebecca said quietly, "and often not the most meaningful one." James nodded slowly, a new respect visible in his eyes. Then he glanced at his watch and stood. "I should go. I have a lot to think about before tomorrow." "What happens tomorrow?" Rebecca asked. I'm supposed to give Daniels my final answer about the partnership, whether I'm in or out. Rebecca rose as well, walking her son to the door. And what will you tell him? James paused on the threshold, framed by the porch light. For a moment, he looked startlingly like Thomas, the same determination in his eyes, the same set to his jaw when facing a difficult decision. I'm not sure. Yet, he admitted. But for the first time in a long time, I'm going to make the decision without worrying about appearances or expectations. I'm going to choose based on what's actually right for my future. Rebecca felt a swell of pride that had nothing to do with business success or financial acumen. That sounds like a good start. James turned to leave, then hesitated. Mom? About that email I sent to the family. You don't need to. Yes, I do, James interrupted firmly. It was manipulative and unfair. I'm going to send a correction. Tomorrow, tell them the truth. Which truth is that? Rebecca asked. James smiled slightly. That my mother is a wiser woman than I gave her credit for, and that I have a lot to learn from her still, about business and about life. As James walked to his car, Rebecca felt something shift between them, a rebalancing that went deeper than offshore accounts or business partnerships. For the first time in years, they had spoken to each other with honesty, without the veils of expectation or obligation that had clouded their relationship for so long. Whether this newfound clarity would last remained to be seen. But as Rebecca closed the door, she felt a cautious optimism she hadn't experienced since James was young. The sense that perhaps the most valuable inheritance she could offer her son wasn't financial at all, but the wisdom to recognize what truly mattered. Monday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn morning. Rebecca found herself unusually restless, wondering what James would decide about the partnership offer. She'd meant what she said. The choice needed to be James's alone, but she couldn't help feeling invested in the outcome. Not because of the money, but because it would reveal something fundamental about who her son had become. Rebecca was tending to her garden when her phone rang shortly after noon. James's name flashed on the screen. Mom, are you busy? Can I stop by? There was something different in James's voice, a clarity and certainty that had been missing for years. Of course, Rebecca replied. I'm just deadheading the roses. 30 minutes later, James's car pulled into the driveway. He emerged looking transformed, not physically, but in his bearing. Gone was the aggressive tension that had characterized him for so long, replaced by a calm purposefulness. I turned it down, he announced without preamble as he joined Rebecca in the garden. The partnership, all of it. Rebecca set down her gardening shears. That must have been difficult. Easier than I expected, actually. James rolled up his sleeves and began helping with the pruning, falling into the rhythm he'd learned as a teenager when they'd tended the garden together. Once I looked at the numbers objectively, the decision was clear. The company's fundamentals don't support another partner drawing profits, especially one buying in at this stage. How did Daniels take it? A wry smile crossed James's face. Well, first he tried to negotiate, offered to lower the buy-in to $150,000. When that didn't work, he got angry, said I was making the biggest mistake of my career. James snipped a faded bloom with unexpected precision. Then this morning, he called me back, suddenly frantic. Turns out our biggest client is pulling their account. The West Coast deal you closed? James nodded. They discovered the software deployment is 6 months behind schedule. Daniels knew about the delays but kept it from the client, and from the rest of the management team. He straightened, meeting his mother's gaze directly. If I'd bought in last week, I'd have owned a piece of a company about to lose 40% of I. It's revenue. You saved me from financial disaster. You saved yourself, Rebecca corrected gently. You took the time to look beyond the opportunity's packaging to what was inside. They worked side by side for a while, the familiar gardening routine creating a space for conversation that felt more authentic than anything they'd shared in years. Rebecca found herself studying her son's profile as he carefully pruned a climbing rose, his movements methodical and focused, so different from the impatient, demanding man who had stormed into her home just days earlier. "I handed in my resignation," James said eventually. "Effective immediately." Rebecca paused, setting down her clippers. "That's a big step. What are you thinking for next moves?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," James admitted. "But I've been doing some reflecting on what you said about building something that's truly mine." He set down his clippers and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small notebook filled with neat handwriting. "I've had this idea for a while, a platform that helps small businesses streamline their operations. Something affordable, intuitive, focused on companies that are too big for spreadsheets, but too small for enterprise solutions." Rebecca listened as James outlined his concept, noting the genuine enthusiasm in her son's voice, so different from the calculated ambition that had driven his pursuit of the partnership. "It sounds promising," Rebecca said when James finished. "What's holding you back?" James hesitated. "Honestly, fear. Starting from zero with no safety net. It's terrifying." "It is," Rebecca agreed. "But that fear keeps you honest, makes you think carefully about each decision. Corporate jobs can insulate you from consequences in ways that aren't always healthy. Like Daniel's hiding the deployment delays," James said thoughtfully. "If it had been his own company, his own money on—" "The line, exactly. Skin in the game changes everything." James closed his notebook, his expression turning serious. "I want to apologize, not just for the ultimatum and the family email, but for everything before that. For years, I've been treating you like an ATM, Rebecca supplied. "Worse than that," James admitted. "Like your only value was what you could contribute to my success. I never stopped to think about what you wanted, what your dreams were." The sincerity in her son's voice touched Rebecca deeply. "We all lose perspective sometimes." "Can I ask you something?" James said, his tone hesitant. "Those offshore accounts, why didn't you ever use them for yourself? Take a luxury vacation, buy a sports car, anything?" Rebecca smiled, looking around at her modest home and garden. "Who says this isn't exactly what I wanted? Not everyone dreams of penthouses and sports cars, James. Some of us find joy in simpler things. But you worked so hard for so long. Doesn't it feel like you denied yourself the rewards?" "Not at all," Rebecca replied. "The rewards were never about material possessions for me. They were about security, about creating possibilities, about knowing that if something happened, illness, economic downturn, any crisis, I could protect what mattered most." "And what was that?" James asked. "You," Rebecca said simply. "Your future, your opportunities, the freedom to make choices based on what was right, not just what was necessary for survival." James fell silent, absorbing his mother's words. The afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the garden they'd tended together for decades. "I sent that correction email to the family this morning," James said finally. "Told them I'd been unfair, that you'd offered what you could without compromising your financial security. That I'd been the unreasonable one." He paused. "I didn't mention the offshore accounts. Thank you for that," Rebecca said. "I'd prefer to keep that information private." "Of course." James hesitated again. "Mom, about my business idea. I'm not asking for investment. That's not why I brought it up. I genuinely want your advice." A warmth spread through Rebecca's chest. At these words, perhaps the first time in years James had explicitly valued her wisdom over her wallet. "I'm happy to help however I can. Maybe we could meet weekly, go over the business plan, refine the concept? Like a mentor relationship?" "I'd like that very much," Rebecca said, surprised at the emotion welling in her throat. 6 months later, Rebecca sat in a small but bright office space downtown, watching as James gave a presentation to their first potential client. The walls were still bare except for a whiteboard covered in flowcharts and a framed photograph. James and Rebecca in the garden, taken the day James had resigned from his corporate job. The business had come together more quickly than either had anticipated. James's technical knowledge combined with Rebecca's decades of financial experience had produced a streamlined platform genuinely useful to small businesses. They'd named it Clarity, a nod to what their relationship had finally found. "So that's our offering," James concluded, turning to the small business owner seated across from them. "Any questions?" "Just one," the woman replied, clearly impressed by the demonstration. "How soon can we implement?" As James discussed timelines, Rebecca reflected on the transformation of the past 6 months. The offshore accounts remained untouched. There had been no need to tap into them. Instead, James had bootstrapped the business with his savings, supplemented by a small friends and family round that Rebecca had participated in as a minority investor. But the real change wasn't financial, it was relational. For the first time in decades, they were true partners, each bringing valuable skills to the table, each respecting the other's contribution. The power dynamics that had distorted their relationship for so long had finally balanced. After the client left, James turned to Rebecca with a boyish grin that reminded her of the child who used to run through sprinklers in the backyard. "That's client number 3. We're officially gaining momentum." "You did well," Rebecca said, pride evident in her voice. "She couldn't sign fast enough." "We did well," James corrected. "Your suggestion about the tiered pricing structure made all the difference." They walked together to the small cafe down the street, their regular spot for post-meeting discussions. As they settled at a corner table, James's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said that day in the garden, about finding joy in simpler things." "Oh?" "I'm starting to understand it," James admitted. "These past 6 months building something from scratch, seeing clients' faces when our solution solves a real problem for them. It's more satisfying than any corporate promotion or bonus I ever received." "Different kind of reward," Rebecca agreed. "I used to think success meant expensive suits, luxury cars, impressing people at cocktail parties," James continued. "But there's something about earning every client, building something that actually helps people. It feels more substantial somehow." Rebecca smiled. "Your father used to say something similar, that true success isn't about accumulation, it's about contribution." James nodded slowly. "I wish he could see this. Us working together, building something meaningful." "He can," Rebecca said quietly. "In his own way." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee, the afternoon sun warming the cafe's worn wooden tables. "What about the offshore accounts?" James asked eventually. "Do you ever plan to use them?" Rebecca considered the question. "Perhaps. Not in the way you might think, though." "How so?" "I've been speaking with a financial advisor about establishing a foundation. Something focused on education and entrepreneurship for underprivileged youth, giving others the opportunities to build something of their own." James's eyes lit up. "That's perfect. Would there be a role for me in that? Not managing the money," he added hastily, "but maybe mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing what we're learning with Clarity?" "I think that could be arranged," Rebecca said, warmth spreading through her chest at her son's enthusiasm for giving back rather than taking more. As they walked back to the office, Rebecca reflected on the journey they'd taken. 6 months ago, James had stormed into her home demanding access to her retirement savings, threatening to cut ties if she didn't comply. Today, they were true partners, in business and in life, each valuing what the other brought to the table. The offshore accounts, which had once been her most closely guarded secret, had served their purpose. Not as a source of funding, but as a catalyst for transformation. Their revelation had shattered James's assumptions about his mother, forcing him to see Rebecca not just as a parent, but as a woman with wisdom, foresight, and values worth emulating. Some might view the accounts as wasted potential, millions sitting untouched that could have funded a more luxurious lifestyle. But Rebecca knew better. Their true value had never been measured in dollars and cents, but in the security and independence they represented. And now, they would serve an even greater purpose, creating opportunities for others to find their own paths to success and fulfillment. As they reached the office door, James paused. "You know, Mom, I used to think you were the one who needed to change, to be more ambitious, more willing to take risks with your money, but I was wrong. I was the one who needed to change how I defined success." Rebecca placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "Maybe we both needed to change. Me to be more open about my life, you to see beyond the material trappings of success." "Well," James said with a smile, "I'd say we're both works in progress." "The best kind," Rebecca agreed, as they stepped back into the office they now shared, not as mother and son, but as partners in the truest sense of the word. 5 years passed more quickly than Rebecca could have imagined. What had begun as a small startup operating out of a modest downtown office had blossomed into Clarity Solutions, a regional powerhouse with over 40 employees and clients across 12 states. The company's growth had exceeded even James's ambitious projections, driven by genuine market need and the unique perspective their partnership brought to the industry. Rebecca stood at the window of their new headquarters, a renovated historic building overlooking the city park, watching employees filter in for the day. At 67, she had scaled back her involvement in day-to-day operations, serving now as chairwoman emeritus and strategic advisor rather than active management. The transition had been James's idea, part of his commitment to ensuring his mother could truly enjoy her retirement. "Morning, Mom," James called as he entered the executive suite, 2 coffee cups in hand. At 40, he had matured into a leader, whose management style blended his natural drive with the wisdom he'd absorbed from his mother over the years. "Thought you might want this before the foundation board meeting." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. "You remembered the board meeting? I thought you had the investor presentation today." "I do," James confirmed, "but I rescheduled my morning to attend the first hour of your meeting. The Youth Entrepreneurship Initiative is too important to miss." The Morgan Foundation had become as much a part of their shared legacy as Clarity itself. Funded primarily through Rebecca's offshore accounts, which had continued to grow over the decades, the foundation focused on creating pathways to entrepreneurship for underprivileged youth. What had begun as a simple scholarship program had expanded to include mentorship, startup incubation, and educational initiatives reaching thousands of young people each year. "You don't need to juggle your schedule for this," Rebecca protested mildly. "I know how crucial this investor round is for the expansion." James smiled, the expression carrying echoes of the eager young boy he'd once been, yet tempered now with a maturity that came from years of genuine partnership with his mother. "The investors can wait an hour. Besides, some things matter more than others." Rebecca felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest at these words. A far cry from the James who had once prioritized business opportunities over everything else. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been setbacks, disagreements, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge. But the foundation they'd built, both literal and figurative, had proven stronger than the challenges they faced. "Have you thought more about the succession plan for the foundation?" James asked as they walked toward the boardroom. "The board will want updates." "I have," Rebecca replied. "I'm thinking it's time for you to take over as chairman." James stopped walking, surprise evident on his face. "Me? But the foundation has always been your vision." "A vision you've helped shape these past 5 years," Rebecca pointed out. "You've brought perspectives I wouldn't have considered, connections I couldn't have made. The foundation needs your energy now, not just my legacy. I'd be honored, James said after a moment. But only if you'll stay on as chairwoman emeritus. Same arrangement we have at Clarity. I still need your wisdom. Rebecca nodded, pleased by the request. It had taken years to reach this balance, where James valued her input without dependence, where advice could be given without control, where each respected the other's unique contributions. The board meeting proceeded smoothly, with Rebecca announcing the transition and the board unanimously approving James's appointment as the new chairman. As the meeting concluded and members filed out, congratulating James, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Later that afternoon, they sat in Rebecca's garden, the same garden where they'd reconnected 5 years earlier, now expanded and more vibrant than ever. James had surprised her by learning horticulture, adding rare roses and designing a Japanese-inspired meditation corner for his mother's 70th birthday. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" James asked, gesturing toward the house. "If I had taken that partnership offer? If you hadn't shown me the accounts?" Rebecca considered the question. "Often, especially in the early days of Clarity. And I think we would have lost each other," Rebecca said simply. "Not immediately, perhaps, but gradually. You would have bought into a failing company, lost your investment, and likely blamed me for not giving you enough to make it work. I would have retreated further into my private world, protecting what remained of my savings. The distance between us would have grown insurmountable." James nodded slowly. "I've thought the same thing. Sometimes I can hardly recognize the person I was then, so focused on appearances, so desperate for validation from people like Daniels who didn't actually care about me." "We all get caught in cycles," Rebecca observed. "The difference is whether we recognize them and break free." "You know what still amazes me?" James said, leaning back in his chair. "Not that you accumulated all that wealth in secret, though that was certainly a shock, but that you never felt compelled to use it for yourself. No midlife crisis sports car, no vacation home in the Bahamas." Rebecca smiled. "The security was what mattered to me, not the trappings. After your father died, I realized how quickly life can change, how vulnerable we all are. The accounts gave me peace of mind that if disaster struck, I could protect what mattered most." "Which was me," James finished for her, echoing a conversation from years earlier. "Which was you," Rebecca confirmed, "though I never imagined the accounts would serve their purpose in quite the way they did." "How do you mean?" "They weren't needed for medical emergencies or economic collapse as I'd feared. Instead, they became a catalyst for something much more valuable, reconnecting with my son." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching bees drift lazily between blooms in the late afternoon light. "I got another offer last week," James said eventually. "A tech conglomerate wants to acquire Clarity. The numbers are substantial." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "I'm assuming you turned it down, given you haven't mentioned it until now." "I did," James confirmed. 5 years ago, I might have jumped at it, seen it as validation, a chance to cash out and move on to something more prestigious. But now—" He gestured around them, at the garden, the house, the life they'd built. "Now I understand what you meant about finding joy in what you build, not what you acquire." "I'm proud of the man you've become," Rebecca said simply. James's phone chimed with a reminder. "I should get going. Alicia and the kids are expecting me for dinner." He rose, then paused. "Why don't you join us? Emma's been asking about her grandma's garden stories, and Ben wants to show you his science project." "I wouldn't want to intrude on family time," Rebecca demurred. "Mom," James said firmly, "you are family time. The kids adore you. Alicia's making your favorite lasagna, and none of us see enough of you these days. Come on. The foundation chairwoman and company founder can spare an evening for her grandchildren." Rebecca smiled. recognizing in her son's insistence the same stubborn care she'd once shown James. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" As they drove to James's home, a comfortable but modest house just 10 minutes from Rebecca's, chosen specifically to keep the family close, Rebecca reflected on the true wealth she'd accumulated in life, not the millions in offshore accounts, which now primarily served the Foundation's mission, but the relationships that had deepened and healed over time. James had married Alicia 3 years after starting Clarity, having met her through a client engagement. Unlike his previous relationships, which had often centered around status and appearance, their connection was built on shared values and genuine respect. Their children, Emma, now 7, and Ben, 5, had brought a joy to Rebecca's life she hadn't experienced since James was small. "Did I tell you what Emma said last week?" James asked as they pulled into the driveway. Her teacher asked what she wanted to be when she grew up. She said she wanted to be like Grandma, rich in all the ways that matter. Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. "She said that?" "She did," James confirmed. When the teacher asked what she meant, Emma explained that being rich isn't about having the biggest house or the fanciest car. It's about having a garden where butterflies want to visit, and a family that wants to visit even more often than the butterflies. Wise beyond her years, Rebecca managed, blinking back unexpected tears. "She gets that from you," James said softly, "just like I eventually did." As they entered the house to the sound of children's excited greetings and the warm smell of home cooking, Rebecca felt a contentment that no amount of money could purchase. Her offshore accounts, once her most closely guarded secret, had ultimately served a purpose far beyond financial security. They had been the catalyst for a transformation that spanned generations, from her own carefully guarded independence to James's evolution from material ambition to meaningful purpose, and now to Emma and Ben, who were growing up understanding what truly constituted wealth. The ultimatum that had seemed so devastating, her son demanding her retirement savings, had become the pivotal moment that changed everything. Not because Rebecca had revealed her hidden fortune, but because that revelation had forced them both to examine what they truly valued, what legacy really meant. As Emma tugged her toward the backyard to show her the butterfly garden she'd started, inspired by her grandmother's own, Rebecca reflected that perhaps this was the true purpose of wealth all along, not accumulation for its own sake, but the freedom to nurture what matters most. For her, that had never been luxury cars or vacation homes. It had been this: the continuation of love and wisdom across generations, a legacy measured not in dollars, but in the values that endured long after material possessions had faded away. "Grandma," Emma said, her small hand warm in Rebecca's, "I saved the best roses just for you." And in that moment, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that she was indeed rich in all the ways that mattered. 3 more years passed, bringing new challenges and opportunities. Rebecca celebrated her 70th birthday surrounded by family, friends, and many of the young entrepreneurs who had benefited from the Morgan Foundation's programs. The gathering was held at Clarity's headquarters, which had expanded again to accommodate their growing team of now 65 employees. James had insisted on organizing the event despite Rebecca's protests that she didn't need a fuss. 70 years of wisdom deserves recognition, James had said firmly. Besides, Emma and Ben have been planning their performances for weeks. The party had been everything Rebecca could have wanted, not lavish or extravagant, but warm and meaningful. Emma, now 10, had played a piece on the violin she'd been practicing for months. Ben, 8, had presented his grandmother with a handmade book titled Why Grandma is My Hero, illustrated with crayon drawings of their garden adventures. Now, 2 months after the celebration, Rebecca sat in her doctor's office staring at the scan results on the screen. "It's early stage," Dr. Morrison explained. "But given the location and type, we need to be aggressive. I'd recommend surgery followed by targeted therapy." "What's the prognosis?" Rebecca asked calmly, her mind already calculating, planning. With prompt treatment, the 5-year survival rate is around 70%, the doctor replied. But I should caution, the treatment itself is demanding. You'll need support. Rebecca nodded, thinking of James, of Emma and Ben, of the foundation and clarity. When do we start? I can schedule the surgery for next week. The sooner we begin, the better your odds. As Rebecca drove home, she found herself in a strange state of clarity. Mortality had always been an abstract concept, something to plan for financially, but not confront directly. Now, facing a diagnosis that carried no guarantees, she felt an urgent need to ensure that everything she'd built would continue, regardless of what happened to her. The garden welcomed her as always, the late summer roses nodding in the gentle breeze. Rebecca moved through her familiar routine, watering, pruning, tidying, finding comfort in these simple tasks that had structured her days for decades. Her phone rang as she finished. James. Mom, are you free for dinner tonight? There's something Alicia and I want to discuss with you. Actually, Rebecca replied, there's something I need to discuss with you as well. Why don't you come over? I'll cook. You sure? We could pick something up. I'd like to cook, Rebecca said firmly. Some things, she felt, were better discussed over a meal prepared with care. James arrived at 6, earlier than expected and alone. Alicia's bringing the kids later, he explained, helping Rebecca chop vegetables for the stir-fry. They're finishing a school project, but they've been asking to see your garden all week. They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythms of cooking as familiar as their garden work had once been. Finally, James set down his knife. So, what did you want to discuss? Rebecca took a deep breath. I saw Dr. Morrison today. The scans came back. James's hands froze on the cutting board. And? It's cancer. Stage 2, pancreatic. Operable, but aggressive. The color drained from James's face. Mom, surgery is scheduled for next week. After that, we'll see what additional treatment is needed. Rebecca kept her voice matter of fact, continuing to prepare the meal as if discussing an ordinary scheduling matter. James set down the knife and pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, his legs seemingly unsteady. What can I do? Whatever you need. Alicia and I can move you in with us during recovery, or we can hire the best home care, or… James, Rebecca interrupted gently. I've already made some arrangements, but there are things we need to discuss about the foundation, about my estate. Mom, stop, James said sharply. We're not discussing your estate like this is the end. This is treatable. You're going to fight this. Of course I am, Rebecca assured him. But fighting doesn't preclude planning. You taught me that. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Rebecca turned down the heat on the stove and sat across from her son, whose face now showed the same vulnerability it had when he was a boy waking from nightmares about his father's death. What was it you and Alicia wanted to discuss? Rebecca asked, offering a momentary reprieve from the weight of her news. James blinked, clearly having forgotten his original purpose. It seems so trivial now. Tell me anyway. James hesitated. We were going to ask if you'd consider moving into our guest house. The kids miss seeing you daily, and with the foundation work and clarity, it would be more convenient. Plus, we've noticed you're slowing down a bit with the house maintenance. He gave a weak smile. Obviously, now there's even more reason. Rebecca felt a surge of emotion at the offer, so different from the time, years ago, when James had suggested. She moved to a senior residence and worked to earn her keep. I appreciate that more than you know, Rebecca said softly. But let me get through this surgery first, see what recovery looks like. Then we can decide what makes the most sense. James nodded, then abruptly stood and pulled Rebecca into a fierce hug. You're going to beat this. You have to. Emma and Ben need their grandma. I need my mom. Rebecca returned the embrace, feeling the strength in her son's arms. "I'm not going anywhere without a fight," she promised. The evening that followed was subdued but not somber. When Alicia arrived with the children, Rebecca insisted they stick to normal routines. Dinner, garden time, Ben's math homework, which had become their special grandmother-grandson ritual. Only after the kids were absorbed in a game did Rebecca quietly share her diagnosis with Alicia, whose nursing background prompted practical, clear-headed questions about her treatment plan. "We'll create a schedule," she said firmly. "Between James, me, and our trusted employees, you'll have support for every appointment, every recovery day." Rebecca smiled gratefully, thinking how fortunate James had been to find a partner whose strength matched his own. The week before surgery passed in a blur of preparations. Rebecca updated her will, though there were few changes needed. The offshore accounts had been mostly transferred to the foundation over the years, with careful provisions for James's family and Rebecca's modest ongoing needs. Clarity was already structured with James as CEO and majority owner, with shares set aside for key employees and the foundation. What occupied most of Rebecca's thoughts, however, wasn't financial arrangements but unfinished conversations. The night before her surgery, she asked James to come alone to the garden for a private talk. "There's something I've never told you," Rebecca began as they sat on the stone bench beneath Thomas's favorite maple tree. "Something about the offshore accounts." James looked surprised. "After all this time? I thought I knew the whole story." "You know how they were created, how they grew," Rebecca acknowledged, "but not why I kept them separate all those years, even from your father." "I assumed. It was for security, like you always said." "Partially," Rebecca admitted. "But there was more." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of a secret carried for over 4 decades. "Before I met your father, I was briefly engaged to someone else. Andrew. We were young, ambitious. He was studying international law. I was just starting in finance. We had plans to travel the world together, build careers across continents." James listened intently, never having heard this part of his mother's history. Then his father's business collapsed. Overnight, their family lost everything. Andrew had to drop out of law school to help support his parents and younger siblings. He took a job as a paralegal, the dreams of international law forgotten. Rebecca's eyes grew distant with memory. "I offered to help financially. I had a small inheritance from my grandmother that could have kept him in school. But he refused, said he couldn't take money from someone he might not end up with, that it would create an imbalance between us." "What happened to him?" James asked, softly. "He ended the engagement a few months later. Said he couldn't see a future anymore that matched our original dreams. The truth was, he'd met someone else, his boss at the law firm, a woman 20 years older with the financial stability to help his family." James's expression showed his understanding dawning. "So the offshore accounts were my promise to myself that if I ever found love again, I would have the means to protect it from financial disaster without creating the dependency Andrew had feared." Rebecca smiled sadly. "When I met your father, the accounts were still modest. As they grew, I considered telling him many times. But Thomas had his own views about money. He believed in living simply, giving generously. The offshore structure felt at odds with his values." "So you kept them secret even from him," James said, no judgment in his voice, just comprehension. "Yes. I told myself they were insurance we'd hopefully never need. After his diagnosis, I almost revealed them. We could have tried experimental treatments overseas, anything that might have helped. But his doctors were clear. His heart condition was too advanced. No amount of money would have changed the outcome." James was quiet for a moment, absorbing this new dimension of his mother's history. "And when I asked you for the money for the partnership, it triggered everything I'd feared since Andrew," Rebecca acknowledged. "The idea that relationships could be reduced to financial transactions, that love could be contingent on economic support. "I'm sorry," James said simply, "for being the one who proved your fears weren't entirely unfounded." "Don't be," Rebecca replied. "In the end, the accounts served their purpose, just not the one I'd originally intended. Instead of preventing a rift, they healed one. They sat together as darkness fell, the garden disappearing into shadow around them." When James finally spoke again, his voice carried a new resolve. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. The foundation, clarity, the work we've built together, it will continue. Not just as business success, but as living proof of what you taught me. That true wealth isn't measured in account balances." Rebecca squeezed her son's hand. "I know it will. That's why I can face tomorrow without fear." The morning of the surgery arrived with a crystalline autumn clarity. As Rebecca was prepared for the operation, the surgical team was surprised by the calm, elderly woman with no signs of anxiety, who joked with nurses and asked thoughtful questions about their families. "Most patients are terrified," the anesthesiologist commented as she checked Rebecca's vitals one last time. Rebecca smiled. "I've made my peace with whatever comes next," she said simply. "I've seen my son become the man I always hoped he would be. Everything else is gravy." As the anesthesia began to take effect, Rebecca's last conscious thought was of James sitting in the waiting room, not the entitled young man who had once demanded her retirement savings, but the thoughtful leader who now carried forward a legacy far more valuable than any offshore account could hold. The surgery lasted nearly 7 hours. James remained in the waiting room the entire time, alternating between pacing the worn carpet and attempting to focus on work emails that now seemed trivial compared to his mother's battle in the operating room. Alicia came and went, bringing food he barely touched and taking the children home as evening approached. When Dr. Patel finally emerged, her surgical mask dangling around her neck, James stood immediately, searching her face for clues. "We got it all," she said, offering a tired smile. "The margins look clear, no visible spread to surrounding tissues. It's the best outcome we could have hoped for." Relief swept through James with such force that his knees nearly buckled. "When can I see her?" "She'll be in recovery for a few hours, then ICU overnight. You can have a brief visit once she's stabilized, but she'll be heavily sedated." Dr. Patel placed a hand on James's shoulder. "Go home, get some rest. Come back in the morning when she'll be more aware." But James couldn't leave, not until he'd seen his mother breathing, living, fighting. When he was finally allowed a 5-minute visit in the ICU, the sight of Rebecca, diminished among the tubes and monitors, her complexion ashen, brought a lump to his throat. This was the woman who had raised him alone, who had worked endless hours to give him every advantage, who had forgiven his worst selfishness and helped him become something better. "I'm here, Mom," he whispered, gently taking Rebecca's hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "You rest now. I'll take care of everything." The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, treatment consultations, and juggling responsibilities. At Clarity and the Foundation, James insisted on attending every doctor's appointment, taking meticulous notes that he later reviewed with Alicia, whose nursing background proved invaluable in navigating the complex medical terminology and treatment options. Recovery was slower than anyone had hoped. Complications developed. An infection that required additional hospitalization, unexpected reactions to the chemotherapy that began 6 weeks after surgery. Through it all, Rebecca maintained the quiet dignity that had characterized her entire life, never complaining, always expressing gratitude to her medical team and family. "You don't need to come every day," she told James during a particularly difficult week when the chemo side effects had left her unable to keep food down. "Clarity needs you. The Foundation needs you." "They're both running smoothly," James assured her. "The teams we built are excellent. Right now, you're my priority." Rebecca managed a weak smile. "How things change. There was a time when I couldn't even get you to return my calls for weeks. The reference to James's former self, the ambitious, self-centered young man who had once seen his mother as little more than a potential investor, didn't sting as it might have years ago. Instead, it reinforced how far they'd come, how completely their relationship had transformed. "Different man, different priorities," James said simply. As winter gave way to spring, Rebecca's condition stabilized enough for her to return home, though with significant limitations. The once vibrant gardener now tired after short walks through her beloved roses. Her appetite remained poor, her weight dropping despite Alicia's nutritious meals delivered daily. Yet her mind stayed sharp, her spirit undiminished. It was during this period of relative calm that James received news that would test everything he'd learned about values and priorities. Daniels, his former boss who had tried to pressure him into the disastrous partnership years ago, reached out unexpectedly through a mutual connection. His company had indeed struggled after losing its major clients, just as Rebecca had predicted. But Daniels had pivoted, developing a new technology platform that had attracted significant venture capital. Now, flush with funding but lacking experienced leadership, he was looking to bring James on as COO with a compensation package that made his eyes widen. 7 figures annually plus substantial equity. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime," Daniels said smoothly during their lunch meeting. "Your experience building Clarity from scratch is exactly what we need. And the exit potential is enormous. We're on track for acquisition by one of the tech giants within 3 years." "I appreciate the offer," James replied cautiously. "But my plate is pretty full with Clarity and family commitments." Daniels waved this away. "Clarity is established now. It can run without your daily involvement. And this role would set your family up for generations. Think about what that kind of wealth could do for your children's future." The words struck a chord, triggering memories of how he'd once viewed his own mother's resources as something to be tapped for his ambitions rather than respected as the fruit of decades of careful stewardship. "I'll think about it," James said noncommittally, ending the lunch with a handshake and a promise to review the formal offer letter. That evening, as had become their routine, James visited Rebecca to share dinner and updates. The spring evening was mild enough for them to sit on the patio, watching birds flit between the feeders Rebecca had insisted on maintaining even during her illness. "You seem distracted," Rebecca observed, setting aside her barely touched plate. "Trouble at Clarity?" James considered deflecting but opted for honesty, another change from the man he'd once been. "Not Clarity. Daniels reached out with a job offer. COO at his new venture, significant compensation." Rebecca's eyebrows rose. "The same Daniels who tried to rope you into that failing partnership? Interesting that he's back on his feet." "New company, new investors, apparently solid technology this time," James explained. "The offer is substantial, life-changing money, according to him." A small smile played at Rebecca's lips. "Life-changing money. I remember those words. I believe I heard them from you about the partnership buy-in." James winced. "Different circumstances, but yes, similar language." "And what are you thinking?" Rebecca asked, her voice neutral, giving no indication of her own opinion. James leaned back in his chair, watching a cardinal land on the nearest feeder. "Honestly, 5 years ago I would have jumped at it without a second thought. The prestige, the potential wealth, it would have seemed irresistible. And now? Now I'm thinking about what I'd be giving up. Time with Emma and Ben during these formative years. The foundation work that's actually making a difference in young people's lives. The culture we've built at Clarity, where profit matters. But not at the expense of our values." He turned to face his mother directly. "I'm thinking about your offshore accounts and how they served their best purpose, not when spent, but when they provided security and eventually legacy." Rebecca nodded, slowly. "It sounds like you already know what matters most to you." "I do," James acknowledged. "But there's this voice, a remnant of my old self maybe, saying that turning down this kind of money would be irresponsible, that providing maximum financial security for my family should override other considerations. The same argument you made to me about my retirement savings, Rebecca observed. The very same, James admitted. The irony isn't lost on me. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the garden where spring flowers were beginning to emerge. When I first set up those offshore accounts, she said finally, I thought I was being wise, creating security that would protect what mattered most. It took me decades to realize that while financial security is important, it's not the only form of security that matters. What do you mean? There's security in relationships, genuine ones, not transactional. Security in knowing your children see your values, not just your bank statements. Security in building something meaningful that outlasts you. Rebecca's voice had grown stronger as she spoke, some of her old passion returning. Ask yourself this. When Emma and Ben are grown, what security will matter most to them? A trust fund, or the knowledge that their father chose to be present in their lives, to model values worth inheriting? James felt something settle within him, the remnants of old ambition giving way to newer, deeper priorities. When you put it that way, it's not even a close call. Then you have your answer, Rebecca said simply. The next day, James declined Daniel's offer with a polite but firm email. The response came quickly, a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled contempt. You're making a massive mistake, Daniel's wrote. Clarity is a small fish. We're building an ocean liner. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've turned down. James read the message with a strange sense of detachment, recognizing in Daniel's words the same entitled assumption he himself had once voiced to his mother, that turning down life-changing money could only be a mistake. That financial opportunity trumped all other considerations. 2 weeks later, as spring fully bloomed, Rebecca suffered a setback. What began as fatigue progressed to fever, then alarming blood test results. The cancer had returned, more aggressive than before, spreading to her liver despite all preventative measures. We can try another round of treatment, Dr. Morrison explained gently during a consultation that included both Rebecca and James at Rebecca's insistence. But I want to be candid about the odds. Given the spread and your body's weakened state from the previous treatments, we'd be buying time rather than aiming for remission. How much time? Rebecca asked, her voice steady. Without treatment, perhaps 3 to 4 months. With aggressive intervention, maybe 6 to 9, but with significant quality of life impacts. James felt his world tilting, the floor seeming to shift beneath him. But beside him, Rebecca remained composed, nodding thoughtfully as if considering a business proposal rather than her own mortality. I appreciate your honesty, Rebecca told the doctor. I'd like a few days to consider my options. On the drive home, silence filled the car until Rebecca finally spoke. I'm not doing more treatment. James gripped the steering wheel tighter. Mom, it's my decision, James. I've had 70 good years. Extraordinary years, especially these last 8 since you and I found our way back to each other. I won't spend my final months in hospitals and treatment rooms, too sick to enjoy what time remains. James wanted to argue, to insist on fighting to the last possible moment. But the respect he'd developed for his mother's wisdom, hard-earned through their journey from estrangement to partnership, held him back. What can I do? He asked instead. Rebecca turned to look at him, a gentle smile softening her gaunt features. Help me get my garden ready for summer. I want to see those prize roses bloom one more time. The weeks that followed Rebecca's decision to forego further treatment were filled with a strange mixture of sorrow and celebration. James had initially struggled to accept his mother's choice, researching experimental treatments and second opinions, until Rebecca gently but firmly asked him to stop. I've made my peace with this path, she told James during one of their evening garden sessions. I'd rather spend my remaining time living fully than fighting desperately. Once James accepted his mother's decision, their focus shifted to making the most of whatever time remained. Rebecca moved into James and Alicia's guest house, not because she needed constant care yet, but to be surrounded by family for her final months. The transition happened gradually, with Rebecca bringing only what mattered most: her favorite books, Thomas's photograph, and cuttings from her most treasured roses to add to James's garden. Emma and Ben adapted to their grandmother's increased presence with the resilience of children, incorporating her into their daily routines without the weight of grief that burdened the adults. They did homework at her table, brought her artwork from school, and treated her increasingly frequent rest periods as natural parts of the day, rather than concerning symptoms. One evening in early summer, Rebecca sat with James on the patio, watching Emma and Ben chase fireflies in the twilight. Rebecca's decline had accelerated in recent weeks, her appetite nearly gone, her energy limited to a few good hours each day, but she had insisted on being outside to enjoy the warm evening. "I've been thinking about Daniels's offer," Rebecca said unexpectedly. James looked surprised. "That was months ago. Why bring it up now?" "Because I want to make sure you don't have regrets," Rebecca replied. "That kind of money could have provided significant security for Emma and Ben." James shook his head firmly. "No regrets. Not even a twinge." He gestured toward his children, their laughter carrying across the garden. "What would that money have bought that could possibly be more valuable than these past months with you? If I'd taken that job, the travel and hours would have meant missing this time entirely." Rebecca nodded, satisfaction evident in her tired eyes. "That's what I hoped you'd say." "Besides," James added, "the real security I want for them isn't financial. It's knowing who they are, what they value, where they came from." He met his mother's gaze directly. "It's the same security you tried to give me, even when I was too blind to see it." Rebecca reached for her tea, her hand trembling slightly with the effort. James instinctively moved to help but stopped himself, allowing his mother the dignity of managing on her own, one of many lessons in respect he'd learned over their journey together. "I never told you the full story about Vivian Keating," Rebecca said after successfully taking a sip. "About how the offshore accounts really began." "I thought you did," James replied. "The inheritance from your grandmother, Vivian's investment strategy. That's the financial part," Rebecca acknowledged. "But not the why. Not what made Vivian offer to help me in the first place." James settled back in his chair, recognizing the beginning of one of his mother's stories, precious gifts that would soon exist only in memory. "When I first started at Westlake, I was the youngest on the team by nearly a decade," Rebecca began. "Eager, ambitious, desperate to prove myself. Vivian was already a legend in the industry, intimidating to everyone, especially junior staff. Like me. About 3 months into my tenure, I discovered a significant error in a major client portfolio, an error Vivian herself had made. The mistake could have cost the client millions if executed as planned." James listened intently, having never heard this story before. "I had 2 choices," Rebecca continued. "I could quietly fix it without drawing attention to her mistake, Curry, favor with the most powerful person in the firm, or I could bring it directly to her, risk her anger, but ensure the client was properly served." "You chose the second option," James guessed. Rebecca nodded. "I scheduled a meeting, showed her the error, and suggested a correction that would protect both the client's interests and the firm's reputation. I was terrified she'd fire me on the spot for challenging her. But she didn't. No. She studied the papers for what felt like an eternity, then looked up and said something I never forgot. There are 2 kinds of people in finance, Rebecca. Those who serve money and those who make money serve a greater purpose. You just showed me which kind you are." Rebecca paused, her gaze drifting to Emma and Ben, now sitting cross-legged in the grass examining their firefly collection in a jar. 2 weeks later, Vivian invited me to lunch and proposed the offshore structure. She said someone with my ethics should have financial security independent of corporate whims. Build a fortress, she told me, not to hide behind, but to give you the freedom to always do what's right, regardless of the cost. James absorbed this, understanding washing over him. So the accounts were never just about security. They were about independence, Rebecca confirmed. The freedom to make choices based on values rather than necessity. To stand up for what matters even when it's costly. This revelation cast new light on Rebecca's entire life. Her modest lifestyle despite significant wealth, her principled approach to business, her refusal to fund James's partnership despite the ultimatum. When you demanded my retirement savings, Rebecca continued, threatening to cut ties if I didn't comply, I faced a choice similar to that moment with Vivian. I could give you what you wanted, preserve our relationship in the short term, but enable patterns that would ultimately harm you. Or I could stand firm, risk losing you, but honor the principles the accounts were created to protect. And you chose principle, James said softly. I chose what I believed would ultimately serve you best, Rebecca corrected. Even at the risk of losing you. James reached over and took his mother's frail hand. Thank you for that. For being strong enough to risk losing me in order to help me find myself. They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled fully around them, the children's bedtime approaching. Finally, Rebecca spoke again, her voice weaker but determined. There's one more decision I've made that I want to share with you. James waited, giving his mother space to continue at her own pace. I've instructed the foundation to establish a new program, the Integrity in Business Initiative. It will fund ethics-focused education and support entrepreneurs who prioritize social responsibility alongside profit. The initial endowment will come from what remains of my personal offshore accounts. That's perfect, James said warmly. A lasting legacy that embodies everything you've stood for. There's more, Rebecca added. I've set aside funds for Emma and Ben's education, of course. But the bulk of my personal estate, separate from the foundation's endowment, will be structured in a rather specific way. How so? They'll each receive a modest sum at 25, enough to pursue dreams but not enough to abandon responsibility. The majority will be held until they're 40. A small smile played at Rebecca's lips. By then, we'll know what kind of adults they've become, what values they've embraced. James understood immediately. You're creating a test, like the one I failed at their age. Not a test, Rebecca corrected gently. An opportunity to demonstrate that they value more than just money, that they've learned what true wealth means. She squeezed James's hand. And unlike me, you won't need to keep it secret. You can prepare them, help them understand what matters most. The full circle of their journey struck James with unexpected force. 8 years ago, he had stormed into his mother's home demanding retirement funds, seeing Rebecca as nothing more than a resource to be tapped for his ambitions. Now, he sat beside that same mother as she designed a legacy meant to instill in the next generation the wisdom James had taken so long to learn. I'll make sure they understand, James promised, that they know the story of their grandmother and the principles she lived by. Rebecca nodded, satisfaction evident in her tired features. That's all I ask. 3 weeks later, surrounded by her family, Rebecca Morgan passed peacefully in her sleep. The garden outside her window was in full bloom, the roses she'd cultivated for decades offering a vibrant tribute to a life well lived. The memorial service was simple but profound, attended by family, friends, Clarity employees, and dozens of young entrepreneurs whose lives had been changed by the Morgan Foundation. James spoke last, his voice steady despite his grief. My mother's greatest asset was never her financial acumen, he told the gathered mourners. It was her understanding that true wealth isn't measured in account balances, offshore or otherwise, but in the lives we touch, the values we uphold, and the legacy we create through our choices. As he returned to his seat, Emma slipped her small hand into his. "Dad," she whispered, "Grandma told me something before she went to heaven. She said that the best things in life can't be bought or sold. Do you think that's true?" James looked into his daughter's eyes, seeing in them the same quiet wisdom that had characterized his mother. "Yes," he said softly, "that's absolutely true. And that understanding is your grandmother's greatest gift to all of us." Years later, James would often reflect on the strange, winding journey that had begun with his demanding his mother's retirement savings, and ended with his receiving something far more valuable, not offshore accounts or material wealth, but a profound understanding of what constitutes a life well lived. The money that Rebecca had accumulated, protected, and finally distributed according to her values had served its purpose, not as an end in itself, but as a vehicle for teaching lessons that transcended financial statements. James had learned these lessons the hard way, through conflict and reconciliation. His children would learn them through stories and example, through the living legacy Rebecca Morgan had carefully, intentionally created. On the anniversary of Rebecca's passing each year, the family would gather in the garden where her ashes had been scattered among the roses. They would share memories, update her on foundation developments, and recommit themselves to the principles she had lived by. And James would silently thank his mother for having the courage to say no all those years ago, for revealing her offshore accounts not as a capitulation to demands, but as the beginning of a transformation that had enriched them all in ways no money ever could. The true inheritance, James would tell his children during these gatherings, isn't in any account, offshore or otherwise. It's in understanding the difference between what you can buy and what truly matters. That's the wealth your grandmother wanted most for all of us, and it's the one thing that never diminishes when shared. 10 years passed since Rebecca's death. James, now 50, sat in his office at Clarity headquarters, reviewing the quarterly reports for both the company and the Morgan Foundation. The business had continued its steady growth, expanding to over 200 employees with offices in 3 states. More importantly, it had maintained the values-driven approach that had become its hallmark since James and Rebecca's reconciliation years ago. The foundation had flourished beyond anyone's expectations, its integrity and business initiative becoming nationally recognized for its impact on ethics education and social entrepreneurship. Just last month, they had celebrated the 100th business launched by program graduates, ventures ranging from sustainable agriculture to affordable healthcare technology, each founded on principles Rebecca would have applauded. James's intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Morgan, Daniels is here to see you." James raised an eyebrow in surprise. He hadn't heard from his former boss in years, not since declining the COO position that had seemed so tempting at the time. "Send him in." The man who entered was markedly different from the polished, confident executive who had once tried to lure James away from Clarity. Daniels looked older than his years, his designer suit hanging loosely on his frame, his expression worn and tired. "James," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Of course," James replied, gesturing to a chair. "It's been a long time. What brings you here?" Daniels's company had made headlines recently, but not the kind any business wanted. After years of aggressive growth fueled by venture capital, they had crashed spectacularly amid allegations of inflated metrics and mismanagement. The latest news indicated bankruptcy proceedings were imminent. "I'll be direct," Daniels said, his former smoothness replaced by a blunt desperation. "I need a job. The company's finished, the investors are suing, and my reputation is in tatters. No one in the industry will touch me." James studied the man who had once embodied everything he himself had aspired to: wealth, status, the appearance of success at any cost. "Why come to me?" he asked finally. "You made it pretty clear what you thought of my decision to stay with Clarity. What was it you wrote?" That I shouldn't come crawling back when I realized what I'd turned down? Daniels winced. I deserve that. But the truth is, you're one of the few executives in the industry I haven't burned bridges with through direct competition or poaching attempts. And your company has a reputation for giving people second chances. This was true. One of the initiatives Rebecca had championed before her death was a hiring program specifically designed for professionals rebuilding after career setbacks. The program had proven remarkably successful, with many participants becoming some of Clarity's most loyal and productive team members. What kind of position did you have in mind? James asked. Anything, Daniels replied, his desperation evident. I know I can't expect leadership, not with my track record. But I have experience, connections, even if many of them aren't speaking to me at the moment. I could handle business development, client services, whatever you need. James considered. The request, remembering his mother's words from years ago. There are two kinds of people in finance, those who serve money and those who make money serve a greater purpose. Daniels had clearly spent his career in the first category. The question was whether he could change. I can't offer you a position today, James said finally, but I can offer you a path. What kind of path? The Morgan Foundation runs a 6-month program for executives in transition. It includes ethics training, mentorship, community service, and project work with our partner organizations. It's not a job. It's more like a fellowship with a modest stipend. But those who complete it successfully often find opportunities, either with us or with our network of ethical businesses. Daniels's expression showed a mixture of disappointment and relief. A 6-month program? I don't know if I can afford. The stipend covers living expenses, James interrupted. Not the lifestyle you're accustomed to, but enough to get by while you rebuild. More importantly, it creates space to reflect on what kind of legacy you want to create with the next chapter of your career. Legacy, Daniels repeated, the word seeming to resonate with him. My father was a factory worker who never made more than $40,000 a year. I was determined to build wealth, to be seen as successful in ways he never was. But now I wonder if he understood something I missed. James smiled, thinking of Rebecca's modest home, her carefully tended garden, the quiet dignity with which she had lived her values rather than merely preaching them. My mother taught me that too, James said, though it took me far too long to learn it. Later that afternoon, James drove to Emma's university graduation ceremony. At 20, she had accelerated through her business degree program with the same determination that characterized everything she did. Ben, now 18, sat in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone. Dad, Ben said suddenly, did you see this? Daniels's company officially filed for Chapter 11 this morning? I did, James replied. In fact, he came to see me today. Ben looked up in surprise. Really? What did he want? A job. A second chance. Are you going to give it to him? James glanced at his son, noting how much he resembled Rebecca around the eyes, the same thoughtful gaze that seemed to look beyond surfaces. I offered him a place in the Foundation's executive rehabilitation program. Whether he takes it, whether he completes it successfully, that's up to him. Ben nodded slowly. Like Grandma did with you, offering a path rather than a handout. A warm pride spread through James's chest. Exactly like that. They arrived at the university's grand auditorium, finding Alicia already seated and saving spots. For them. As they waited for the ceremony to begin, James found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. 20 years ago, he had stormed into his mother's home, demanding retirement savings for a business opportunity that would have ended in disaster. He had seen Rebecca as nothing more than a resource, a means to his own ambition. He had been willing to sever their relationship over money, unable to recognize that the true wealth his mother possessed had nothing to do with offshore accounts. Now, He sat watching his daughter graduate, his son beside him, both of them raised, with an understanding of value that had taken him decades to learn. They knew the story of their grandmother's offshore accounts, not as a tale of hidden wealth, but as a lesson in independence, integrity, and the courage to stand for principles even at personal cost. After the ceremony, as they celebrated at Emma's favorite restaurant, she surprised everyone by announcing her post-graduation plans. "I've decided to defer my job offers," she said. "I'm going to spend a year working with the Foundation's Youth Entrepreneurship Program in underserved communities." "Are you sure?" Alicia asked. "The corporate positions you were considering offered remarkable starting salaries." Emma smiled, her expression reminding James powerfully of Rebecca. "The money will still be there in a year, but this feels right, building something meaningful before diving into corporate life." James caught his daughter's eye across the table, seeing in her the culmination of a legacy that had nothing to do with financial inheritance and everything to do with values. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud," he said softly. "She understood that true wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you contribute." That night, as had become his tradition on significant family occasions, James visited the garden where Rebecca's ashes had been scattered. The roses were in magnificent bloom, tended now by both James and Ben, who had inherited Rebecca's green thumb. "We're doing okay, Mom," James said to the quiet garden. "Better than okay. The lessons continue, the legacy grows." He smiled, watching fireflies begin to appear in the summer twilight. "Not bad for a journey that began with me demanding your retirement savings, is it?" The offshore accounts that had once been Rebecca's closely guarded secret had long since been folded into the Foundation's endowment, creating opportunities and second chances for countless individuals. But their greatest impact had been on the transformation of one family, from values nearly lost to values deeply embedded, from wealth pursued at any cost to wealth measured in contribution and character. Emma joined him in the garden, sitting quietly beside him on the bench. "I've been thinking about something Grandma told me before she died," she said after a moment. "She said that the true purpose of wealth isn't freedom from work, but freedom to do work that matters." James nodded, hearing his mother's wisdom in her words. That was the real gift of the offshore accounts, not the money itself, but the independence it gave her to make principled choices, to stand firm when it mattered most. "Like when you demanded her retirement savings," Emma said with a small smile. "Exactly like that," James acknowledged. "Her no was the greatest gift she ever gave me, though it took me years to understand it." "Do you think Daniels will understand?" Emma asked. "Or is he just looking for a financial lifeline?" "I don't know," James admitted. "Change that profound isn't something you can predict or force. All you can do is offer the opportunity, create the space for transformation to happen. The rest is up to the individual." As they walked back toward the house, James felt a profound gratitude for his mother's refusal so many years ago, the no that had ultimately given him everything that mattered most. Not offshore accounts or material wealth, but a legacy of values that continued to grow richer with each passing generation. "You know," Emma said as they reached the patio door, "I think the real moral of our family story is that sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones you can deposit in a bank." James smiled, placing an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "That's exactly right, and that understanding itself is your grandmother's greatest gift to all of us." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.